Welcome back to the People Analytics Podcast. I'm your host, Lindsay Patton. Today I have with me Rodney Evans, who is partner at the Ready. Welcome, Rodney. How are you?
Great, Lindsay. How are you doing?
I'm well. So I am excited to talk to you today because we see eye to eye on a lot of stuff. So let's just jump into it. Why does the Ready exist?
Sure. Yeah. The Ready exists to change the world. We want to make the world a more adaptive and more human place to live and to work.
Yeah. And so tell me how that came to fruition, because I know that you had some experiences in your career that led you to this point.
Yeah. So, I sometimes I think of my partner, Aaron Dignan, founded the Ready. In some ways, he and I had very parallel work and life experiences where we both had other consultancies before this and sort of stumbled our way in some ways into understanding that if you're not designing organizations differently, the rest of the things that you're trying to do, whether it's create a new product or cultivate better leaders or invent a new technology or do a digital whatever you're trying to do, if you don't have the right operating system inside of your company, the content that you're trying to do is going to fall flat. And so we both sort of found our way to this systems design world separately, and then met each other and then started working together at the Ready. We have since and launched another business called Murmur that is a technology business, as well as a podcast and lots of other things over the last 6 years or so.
Congratulations on that success. So one thing I like about your mindset is how the Ready changes the how instead of the why. Could you go on and elaborate about what that means to you?
Yeah, absolutely. So, when we think about organizations, a lot of the mindset that's a more traditional mindset is a very bureaucratic mindset. It's a mindset that was invented on the factory floor where we separate the thinking from the doing, where a lot of the workers are working in a permission-based way, where the managers and the leaders are the ones who sit off to the side and evaluate the real work being done. But we don't work on a factory floor anymore. And so those kind of complicated bureaucratic solutions don't serve us very well. And so in a knowledge economy, in the kind of jobs that most of us have that require judgment, that require creativity, what we want is a lot of autonomy. We want to see the people who are doing the work have enough authority to change how they do the work. Because a lot of times, when we want to see a better widget or we want to see more efficiency or we can't do that just by going faster or pushing harder or working more. We have to reconsider how we are actually doing our work. And what we find that is truly it does feel sometimes like a little bit of magic is how much the how can have outsized impact on the what. And what I mean by that is a lot of times, we work with a lot of big companies. A lot of times I'll go into an organization and there will be something, say, that's cross-functional that really isn't working well. And usually what that looks like is, we have the sales team and the operations team and the technology team and the finance team and the procurement team and the legal team, and they all report up in the hierarchy to different people, and they all have different targets they need to meet, and they all have different ways of working. And there's a lot of murkiness around who actually gets to decide what. And when we just get the right representative from each of those groups into an operating rhythm of meetings, into different meeting types, into making decisions in different ways, all of a sudden, a lot of the static and a lot of the sludge gets resolved really, really quickly. And people are like, did you just do that with meetings and decision making? And it's yes. But historically, what we were focused on was what the salesperson was doing, what their leads looked like, what the legal person was redlining. We get so jammed up on the content that we don't think about the containers and the fact that that's really where things fall apart, but that's also where we can put them back together.
Yeah. And another thing I really admire about you is your view toward leadership, because we say over and over, organizational change, it comes from the top down. Management, that toxic comes from the top down. But what does it mean to emulate it? And so you are a leader that is actually emulating it. And the example that I love that you gave me is how you and Aaron, your business partner, you're in therapy together. You're in business therapy.
Yeah, totally. So yeah, Aaron and I have a coach. He's amazing. And the reason that we are doing that work together is because for us, that is what working on the how looks like. It looks like having someone help because we know what we know and we only have our own awareness, and that when you're two people who are trying to steward two businesses effectively, sometimes you need external help, and maybe that's a coach, or maybe that's an org designer, or maybe that's a strategist, or maybe that's whomever. But the point is, if we're not sort of like walking our own walk in terms of identifying when there's a tension and trying a different practice to resolve it, then like how can we be out in the world doing this work?
And something that you mentioned that I really respect is that, you and Aaron get along great. You haven't necessarily reached the point where you like it's a necessity. You're doing this as an investment because you want to make sure you don't cross those problems.
Absolutely. I mean, Erin is one of my best friends in the world. We have a partnership that I think would be enviable to like anyone who saw inside of it. And if you're going to work in a self-managing system, and what I mean by that is a consent-based system where there's not a traditional hierarchy, there's not traditional bosses, there's not sort of top-down mandate, there's a very high likelihood that you are going to need to do your own personal work, whether that takes the form of therapy or coaching or mindfulness or whatever it is. Because when you work in a traditional system, when you work in a traditional toxic, often toxic, not always, but often toxic hierarchy, and things go wrong, you have someone to blame. You're like, well,
Yeah.
my boss told me to do this and it didn't work out. And so like she's a moron and that sucked. And that's how that goes. You can project your own failures on the system or on your teammates or on boss or whomever. When you work in a self-managing system like ours, there's no there's no one to go project your stuff onto. And so, I've just found over the years, because I have avenues to change any aspect of my working life that I don't like or that causes me tension or that holds me back from doing my best work, because I have that agency, then I have to deal with the stuff that comes up when I am unhappy, because I don't have someone to just go like, well, this is out of my control. He sucks.
Yeah.
Screw this. I have the ability to change it. And so then the question becomes, what am I feeling? What do I need? What is a request I could make? What is a proposal I could write, et cetera, et cetera. And some of us, I would say most of us, some help and need some of our own self work to be able to do that really effectively. And I think, for Erin and I, certainly, both of us have done work separately. And I think it feels to me like having a coach, it's like having a coach for us for like, duo tennis. Like, it's like, if you're going to be on the court together trying to do something really, really hard, like, you wouldn't expect a doubles tennis team to not have a coach that's looking at how they show up, how they play, how they strategize, and not giving them feedback on what they could do differently. And so I just feel like if you want to be at the top of your game, figure out what the support structure is that you need so that you can do that.
Yeah. So I want to transition into this hierarchical culture that we live in, especially
Yeah.
within the Western world. So, can you talk a little bit about how you're fighting back and kind of trying to change that?
Yeah, I can. I mean, I came from such traditional companies. My first jobs from, when I was an intern, I worked for the Gartner Group and I worked for consulting, and then I worked for Deutsche Bank. And, I would say in, in all of those contexts, like I was very well worded.
Mm.
Like I really I am someone, I hate to admit it, but I am someone who appreciates external validation. I liked pleasing my bosses. I liked getting the exceeds expectation ratings. I liked being at the top of the bonus curve. Like, I liked all of those trappings, and I was winning in many ways at that game. And yet, I didn't really feel like I was doing work that was very meaningful in a lot of ways. And mostly that was because I wasn't particularly encouraged to. A lot of the ideas that I had, once they sort of went through the machine of the bureaucracy of like talking to 15 stakeholders and doing the 14th PowerPoint revision and getting the 20th approval and whatever, by the time it sort of went through that machine, it had been whittled down or watered down to nothing, or stalled completely, or the budget dried up, or whatever. And so once I sort of, it feels like seeing through the matrix. Like, once I sort of saw that it was the system, not my individual boss, or not me, or not my ideas, or not my team, or whatever, I started to get really interested in alternative ways of organizing and working. So at the Ready, and we're not the only people out there doing this, at the Ready, we believe strongly in self-management. And a lot of folks hear that and they go like, oh, yeah, just fire all the bosses and have chaos and it'll just be like these hippies and whatever. And that is 100% not what self-management is. If anything, I would tell you self-management is more disciplined and actually requires more rigor and more thought about the how of work, because we don't just have all of these implicit and explicit power structures telling us about the how of work. So just to give a super easy example, if I was still working at a traditional company and I had an idea for a different kind of work schedule. Let's say I still worked on my old team and I thought that we should have no meeting Fridays, and on Fridays we should all have time to think and read and do real work and write and make stuff. If I still worked at one of my old companies, I would have like written something, probably in a PowerPoint deck, and brought that to my boss. And maybe in that meeting, they would have given me some feedback, but more likely it would have kicked off that machine. And probably by the end of that machine, that idea would be dead. Maybe we would have 1 hour on Fridays, but more likely we would have nothing. And so that's how hierarchies work. And in self-management, instead of that, what I want to do is I'm going to be able to bring a proposal and I'm going to ask for their consent to try something with the bar of what is safe to try. So self-management is not about just leaderlessness. In fact, a lot of the proposals that one sees in self-management over time are about power and are about concentrating authority over here, because we've realized we actually need someone with more in finance to keep our finance tolerances safe, or we need more authority over here because we are seriously committed to Jedi work and we need someone to steward that for us and protect us and tell us when went off the rails. And so self-management isn't about getting rid of power structures. It's about making them explicit and asking for consent. And so what that means also is like, I can't just start to impose my view. I can't tell anybody what they have to do at my company. And if over time they don't want me in a certain role, I will likely be elected out of it at some point if I am not performing in a way that serves the group. So these are all like little bits and pieces, but the idea here is we see a future that is neither chaotic, like how a lot of Web3 land lives, nor bureaucratic, like how a lot of the Fortune 500 lives, but is this third thing, which is a more self-managing, more empowered way of working.
So one example that I love that you do at the Ready is you create an equitable environment by not having like a 90-day wait period. At day one, new hires are already part of that culture. So can you describe what it's like for a new hire at the Ready?
Yeah, I mean, rather than doing the traditional sort of probationary thing, we started something a long time ago that's called the prologue period. And the intention of the prologue period, it's actually funny because it sometimes gets misunderstood by new hires and they think it is like a trial period. But actually what we found and the reason that we first governed it internally was because a lot of people come in, or not so much anymore, but in the early days of the Ready, we had people enter the system who didn't fully understand what this work is like and what it's like to work in a self-managing system, and just had different passions. Like they were like, what I really want to do is coaching, and what I really want to do is whatever it was, strategy, or what I really want to do is whatever this thing is. And what we found was they liked the company, but they didn't really like the work that we did. And so we created this period of time that is a much more feedback rich environment that is really intended for people to be able to learn and suss out whether this is the place for them and for us. So we see it as this period of determining mutual fit through a lot of feedback in both directions, both prologue members saying to their team members like, hey, I'm not learning what I need to, or you're not getting me reps, or how can I be more involved in this or whatever. And members being able to say to prologue members like, hey, you're not showing up in this way, or we really need you to contribute in this way or whatever. And so we have these pauses throughout the prologue periods where basically we're deciding on both sides whether we want to recommit to each other, whether we want to stay together. And so we sort of, it's sort of like dating. It's like there's this period of time where we're dating. We don't start on day one with a marriage, but we also don't start on day one assuming that there's a power dynamic where we decide whether you're good enough to be here. And we're still fiddling with it. It's still not perfect, but we just find that it's a better way of starting off than the way a lot of traditional orgs do.
And I love that. I feel like the employer-employee relationship should be mutual when too much power has and weight has been put into the employer. In class last week, a student brought up how he asked the potential employers questions like, what about me do you think could succeed? And so we got into a whole discussion on how it's important that the interview is you interviewing the employer just as much as the employer is interviewing you. And I feel like you can feel empowered when you look at it that way.
100%. And I've done some work over the years with Duke, which is right down the road from me here in Durham, North Carolina. And a lot of the folks in graduate programs there have asked me like, what's a good question to ask in an interview to know if a company is like what you're describing as the future of work, or whether it's like an old school company. And the thing that I always say is like, ask them about the how and get specific. So ask them like, new future boss, like, how do you make decisions? Or like, how much authority do you personally have to make a decision? Or tell me what a typical team meeting looks like. What do you talk about? How many people participate? Who facilitates? Ask about tooling. Be like, how do you share information? Like, getting at the how will tell you everything that you need to know about a company's culture. And usually I find that the miss is in an interview context in particular, the candidate either wants to talk about the interviewer as a person or wants to talk about themselves as a person. And I'm like, none of that will tell you really what you want to know, which is, how does this place work?
Yeah, absolutely. So I want to get into, like that toxic experience that put you on your mission to change the world, because I feel like it's hard to go through work, a career, and not come across a toxic situation. And I feel that a lot of workers, it radicalizes them or it makes them bitter. I'm getting out of the bitter phase myself and into the radicalization phase. So how did that experience motivate you to make the world better for workers?
I mean, it's a really interesting question, and I would love to hear a little bit about your story too. Like,
Okay.
I don't know that it was one one moment, but I think it was probably the biggest. And then there were many turning points after that because I have never had a plan and I still don't have a plan. And I just, life is just like a series of,
Yeah.
but I remember at my last job at Deutsche Bank, my boss was going to be leaving. She was going to be repatriating to her home country after many, many years as an expat. And there was some discussion underway about, what would happen to the team and what would a future role for me look like and succession planning and things like this. And what I realized then was that more success in that environment was going to be like a pie eating contest where the prize was more pie. Like all I was going to get if I kept climbing the ladder there was more money, definitely more money, but also more overwork, more burnout. And people misunderstand burnout. People think burnout is just from like sprinting all the time and sprinting forever, and that's part of it. But the bigger part of burnout is lack of control.
Hmm.
Where you don't have a lot of freedom to do things the way that you would like for them to be done or to make improvements that would make your work and your life better. That is a huge contributor to burnout. And as a person who works a lot and works quite hard but doesn't experience burnout in my current organization, it's because no one is coercing me or forcing me to do things. Basically, if I'm overworking, it's because I have chosen to overwork, not because somebody is making me do it. And so I think that was a big realization to me, was like, oh, I'm climbing this ladder and this ladder goes to a really crappy place.
Yeah.
and and like, look, I feel like I always have to give the caveat, like, I am an incredibly privileged person to be able to make the choices and particularly make the leaps that I made. And the first 10 years of my career, I had student loans. I paid my own rent. I didn't have a net. I didn't have savings. I didn't have family money that was going to prop me up. Now, to be clear, I was still always going to like have a home and be fed and have that much support. But I wasn't a trust fund kid that was like, YOLO, I can do what I want. And so
Yeah.
I'm only saying that out loud because I think that for me, and maybe this will resonate with some of your listeners, for me, it took getting to a certain level of stability and security to feel like I had the freedom to make a different choice. And also to see that all of those things I had been working really hard for didn't make me particularly happy. And in fact, I was like particularly unhappy, and then also developed coping mechanisms to deal with that unhappiness that were not particularly healthy, from like, not working out to probably like partying more than I should to not having good sleep habits to like, on Friday night, just feeling like I wanted to like stare at a wall and drink a bourbon because my
Yeah.
brain was so
Yeah.
shot. And so I just, to me, it was like, it was just trading off. It was just like, okay, well, if I don't want this and I can't nothing, I'm not a person can just like sit on a beach and what is the other option? And so that was when I really started to explore who was out there who was trying to revolutionize the world of work. And that was a big. What about you? Did you have like a moment or many moments? I would love to hear your
Oh
story.
wow. There were many moments and then one big moment. So I was born and raised in Michigan, and I had an opportunity to move to Philadelphia. A Shark Tank company had hired me, and it was a vice president role. And like I was very, in terms of like output, ambitious. So I'm like this, this is I feel stuck in my career. I'm going to do this. I've always wanted to live on the East Coast, which true. I'm so glad that I did that because obsessed with Philly. And it was just, they were a little bit younger than me. One of the co-founders had been fired from every single job and like used that as like a point of pride in a way. So there is a red flag. Um, And so why I appreciate what you and Aaron do is because they waited until it was too late to get the coaching that they needed. And it didn't work because they were too deep. So it was just a lot of inappropriate behavior, verbal abuse. They made us watch their dogs and be responsible for them even after like closing time. A couple of people that I managed had to watch their dog like an hour, hour and a half after closing time because the co-founders weren't coming back. And it was just they're they have very big and very fragile egos. So it was just a lot of that, entitlement type behavior. And it led to a contentious business divorce. We were like, encouraged to choose sides. And one of the co-founders was locked out of the company. And so I was like, okay, well, she's the most toxic one, so things will get better. No, did not get better. The other co-founder had no one else to place her stress on, so I was the target. At that point, I was burned out from just the constant verbal attacks, the dysfunction, and so my migraine attacks, which I've had my entire adult life, they became chronic. And my migraine attacks, when I'm down, I'm down. Like I'm vomiting, I cannot sit up straight. Like there's no way that I can do work. And it really frustrated the co-founder that I was taking off that much work. Like I was disabled essentially. I mean, it is recognized. So she was upset when I asked to work from home because I had a sinus infection and told me that I had all my sick days were taken away. I have to use PTO. And if I want to work from home, I have to use PTO. I had 18 PTO days and had to split them up between seeing my family in Michigan, my migraine attacks, any other sickness, and maybe if I wanted a vacation, that probably wouldn't have happened. And so that was really like the point where I was like, these aren't like, I mean, I knew they weren't good people, but that was like wow, they're really not good people moment. And I even like went to HR, and HR told me that since there were fewer than 15 employees, they didn't have to abide by the Americans with Disabilities Act. They did not have to accommodate me. And that was the moment that sent me just seeing red. And I was like, I'm done.
Ugh, I'm
So that's
sorry
the
that
short
happened.
version. There are many
Yeah.
other scary details in between in terms of behavior, but yeah, that's what happened.
I mean, I feel like, Lindsay, inside of your story, though, is like everything that we see that's wrong with work.
Yeah.
It's like there's a lack of clarity around what leadership roles are. There's a lack of consent from the people who are being led around what their remit is and how they best serve the organization. And then, most importantly, in terms of you and your own illness and how you were treated, there's two things that come to mind for me that we talk about a lot. One is fundamentally believe theory Y people, not theory X people, which means that we fundamentally believe that human beings want to contribute, like
Yeah.
that we want to make a difference, that we want to show up, that we want to do good work. And if we're not doing that, there is likely a reason, and it's probably environmental, it could be
Mm-hmm.
psychological, but that like our default position isn't being lazy and
Right.
needing to be controlled and told. Like our default position is wanting to show up and cooperate and collaborate. We are wired as an animal to be cooperative generally. And the world takes that away from us, not the other way
Yeah.
around. And then second is, when I hear things like using PTO and being managed by time in that way, first of all, it's such a stupid way to manage people because
It
it's like,
really is.
great. So you're present in the office with a blinding migraine, and like, how much are you getting done? And can you even function? Like, it's so dumb. And
Yeah.
second, infantilizing. It's like,
Oh,
we're
truly.
all adults in these situations. You're a person who is old enough and able to like buy a home or have a child or make major life decisions or whatever, and yet you're not someone who is trusted to manage your own time and your own health, and a company feels like they know better and can tell you that, like, that just seems like the definition of insanity to me.
Yeah, the asking permission. And for people like me who do have disabilities, have health issues, have chronic conditions,
Mhm.
it is so embarrassing asking permission to take care of your body and having someone else have power over that. It is just like you said, it's I'm an adult. Why are you telling me I can't tend to my body?
Right. Exactly. Exactly. So I am sorry that that happened to you, and it sounds
Yeah, and I feel like a lot of people, there are different reasons why people chase leadership, and I think power is a big reason that needs to be evaluated. I chase it for freedom because, like no, there's no one I have to ask permission. I can work the way I want to work, but I think too many people chase it for power, and that needs to be attacked and dismantled.
I mean, I think you're right, and I think those things are very related to each other. I think one of the reasons that people do chase power is because they have had the experience of being controlled or imposed upon or coerced or abused or whatever. And so they're like, I need to rise to a level where I don't have to endure that. And then they just create the same pattern with the people who are reporting to them.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
so it's like, if we could all be liberated, like if we could all be free and none of us needed to have power over others in order to have freedom for ourselves, what a world that would be.
Yeah, yeah. So you also mentioned, during your decision to quit your job, that you took a year off and that helped change your perspective. Obviously, you prefaced with you are privileged in the sense that you were able to do that. But even just taking, a week off or doing some intentional time off, how can that help a person that kind of is in that burned out position?
I mean, I truly cannot. I see people so frequently just jumping from one bad situation into a new situation, expecting that the situation is going to change and then recreating exactly what they had over here in the new context because they don't do the work of like threshold and some liminal space where they perspective get in touch with their values
Yeah.
rest. And so, yeah, I was incredibly fortunate that I was in a position to take a year off. That was after Deutsche Bank, and I traveled around the world with my now husband. He was not my husband then. And look, on the one hand, I understand that that is not an opportunity that's accessible to a lot of people. On the other hand, there are a lot of people who say out of hand, that's not possible. There's no way. And really like for a lot of people, I think it depends on mindset. So for Ed and I, for example, we gave up our apartment in New York City, um, saved money for sure before doing that. We opted not to have a wedding. And basically, the money that we would have spent on a New York City wedding lasted for a year of travel. And again, I'm not saying that that's the right decision for everyone, but I'm saying if you really start to look at what you want and what's important to you, what was important to us was having this shared experience, seeing life outside of New York City. He grew up in New York, I grew up in Connecticut. We both went to school in the Northeast. We had both lived our whole adult lives in Manhattan. And we were like, let's see what else is out there. And having, left Wall Street and an apartment in the East Village and then gone right to Mongolia, it like really shifted my perspective and shifted my perspective in a way that it never shifted back. So, being in other countries, seeing how people lived, seeing what people lived with and how and like frankly how happy the happiness index in places like Mongolia is incredibly high, and at the time there was not a lot of material there. It's this was 10 years ago. Things have changed a lot in Mongolia, but just as an example, you go to other countries that are more more community focused, more collectively oriented, not driven by work and capitalism and amassing wealth and stuff as the first driver, and just hanging out in other places for a full year kind of reset my way of thinking to be like, how much do we actually need? Like, it's
Yeah.
not as much as I thought. It's not as much as Wall Street tells you need, for sure. And so I think when we came back and we started trying to decide where we were going to live, it's sort of like what I was saying about, how people behave rationally based on company that they're in or based on the organization that's around them. We were like, if we come back to New York and we just go parachute back into our old lives, we're going to immediately start that we were
Mhm.
before. And so we really thought about where we were going to live and what was most important to us and what a lower cost of living would do in terms of our freedom or our ability to not work all the time. And we never went back to New York. We moved to North Carolina and we have a really wonderful life here. And I'm not sure hadn't taken that trip, if we hadn't sort of severed all ties, I'm not and seen how a lot of the rest of the world lives and works, I'm not sure that we would have made some of the decisions that we did that have turned out to be really great.
That's awesome. And it really, it shows the power of taking a break. And I feel like we put a lot of pressure on ourselves. And if we have a weekend where we don't do anything and we're just lazy, we feel bad about it. But that's okay. We need to rest. And we are in a world right now that is full of a lot of chaos, a lot of stress, and taking care of yourself should be number one right now.
Absolutely. And I think to the exact point that you just made, other cultures don't see rest as being lazy. They
Yeah.
just see it as part of life. And, Aaron and I have a podcast called Brave New Work, and there's an episode coming up that we interview Oliver Berkman, who wrote a really wonderful book, basically taking down like the traditional productivity industry. And this is a lot of what he talks about the fact that our orientation toward completing tasks and doing stuff and using our time well is kind of just like nonsense. Like, it's kind of a made up thing and it has really nothing to do with a life well lived. Finishing the things on your to-do list has not much to do with having a really fulfilling and satisfying life. And so I think, to your point, I would love to see us reorient to spaciousness and rest and sure. And understanding that those things don't have to be only at the end of a marathon. Those things should be a part of how.
I think that is a beautiful note to end on, a little bit of wisdom to rest. Rodney, you have been a delight. It has been amazing talking about just looking at work in a different way, in a more healthy, positive way. And I'm so glad you're doing this in the world and changing the world. But before we sign off, what's the best way people can learn more about you, get in touch?
Yeah. So thank you so much for having me. You can find me on Twitter. I'm at Rodney Evans 919. I do tweet, I try to be on Twitter. I'm on LinkedIn. You can see more about The Ready at theready.com. And of course, you can get the Brave New Work podcast wherever you get your podcasts.
So many awesome places to find you, Rodney. Thank you. And again, I'm Lindsay, host of People Analytics. If you or anyone you know is like Rodney who wants to change work for the better, please reach out to me, lindsay@staffgeek.com. Thank you for listening to Staff Geek's People Analytics podcast. I'm your host, Lindsay Patton, and I'm always looking to interview leaders who put people first. If you or someone you know lead with a people-first mindset, please email me at lindsay@staffgeek.com. That's LINDSAY@staffgeek.com. If you want to take things a step deeper and understand your organization's true culture DNA, I encourage you to take Staff Geek's free culture assessment. Just head to staffgeek.com and click the button that says free culture assessment. Thanks again for listening.